The New York City Mafia was controlled by 5 families. Murders, fights, assassinations and thefts were all throughout the city at that time. The golden age of these families will be discussed in today's chapter, along with their extensive involvement and influence over a variety of city sectors, both legitimate and illicit. Construction, petroleum, transportation and other industries were considered lawful, although gambling, murder, kidnapping, extortion, money laundering and drug trafficking were considered prohibited. We'll also go into the FBI's clever, bizarre and intricate strategies for stopping these families, such as covert monitoring and listening device placement. The tale will astound you. It's not only about the Mafia, it's about the families who controlled one of the biggest American cities and turned it from a place of happiness to one of terror. Although it is only a narrative about the Mafia, it is about families that controlled one of the most significant American cities and transformed it from a place of happiness to one of terror. Hi there, this is Omar. Welcome to our house. Our activities will begin in 1980. 5 Mafia families that dominated New York City, the U.S. economy's financial center, are at the center of our tale. The Gambino family, which was headed by Paul Castellano in the 1980s, is the first. Next are the Lucchese family, headed by Tommy DeSimone, and the Genovese family, headed by Vincent Gigante. The Bonanno family, headed by Filippo Phil Rastelli, comes last. These households were led by the 5 people I named. The 5 families in our tale are Italian families, which means that they are descended from Italian immigrants who came to America in the late 1800s. To put it briefly, these individuals wrought mayhem in America by introducing the Mafia lifestyle from Italy. There are many other families in the nation, of course, but these are the primary ones that held the biggest portion of the pie. We won't go into great depth in this tale about how these families came to be, and the atrocities they committed, since the film may go on for 5 hours. Rather, we shall focus on their heyday up to their incarceration in the 1970s. The Mafia had a structure. In a complicated way, the FBI's investigations of them lacked organization. They lacked a plan and a strategy. For instance, all they could do when they came across someone they didn't know and were wary about was snap a photo of him and ask the informants they collaborated with whether they knew him. After receiving a yes or no response, they would attempt to find out about his criminal history and the people he was interacting with. They would then add him to the list of family members to whom he belonged. The boss was at the top of the hierarchy, followed by the underboss, the capos, the captains, and the soldiers who reported to the captains. As you can see, the families were very well organized. The FBI's biggest issue at this point was that there was no means to get in touch with the underboss. The good people's main responsibility was to give commands. They were amazingly removed from any criminal activities. The troops and other lower-ranking individuals were the ones who carried out the crimes and sent the money to the higher-ranking officials. For example, the FBI would jail these soldiers for a year or 2 after they were captured, but this didn't address the underlying issue, since there were more soldiers than any other rank, and they were involved in violent crimes like drug selling, bank robberies, and kidnappings. They also engaged in racketeering, usury and extortion, all of which are prohibited by God. The nation was essentially lawless. To put that in perspective, almost 50 banks in New York alone were looted in a single month. As a result, everyone claimed that the Mafia controlled New York. You'll see what I mean when I say that the story's events were out of the government's control. Protecting people's property was one of the ways the Mafia engaged in extortion. However, how could they compel the public or company owners to pay for insurance in return for ensuring that their properties would not be damaged or vandalized? Protection against destruction, arson and assaults by rival gangs or even family members was often covered by this insurance. People who refused to give them the money they wanted were either slain or had their homes or places of employment destroyed by fire. They used this as one of their extortion techniques. Lending money to individuals was the Mafia's second tactic, which is essentially the same as the first. Those that were unable to repay them joined their companies as partners. For instance, Michael Franzese, a member of the Colombo family, did this. After securing a franchise for a mobile gas station, he began to amass substantial wealth. He then entered the gasoline industry. On Long Island, there was a guy who operated a little gas station. He approached Michael and presented a plan to cheat the government on gasoline taxes. He informed him that he earned $350,000 in a single week. Michael found resonance in this concept and advanced it. The idea was for Michael and his Mafia group to set up fictitious businesses or legal fronts that operated in the gasoline trade. These businesses were run with the sole intention of evading taxes, even though they seemed to be entirely legal on paper. How was this accomplished? After purchasing gasoline from wholesalers, the businesses would resell it to distributors and petrol stations. The government was expected to collect taxes on each gallon of petroleum sold after it was sold. In order to avoid the government following them, since no taxes were being paid, the Mafia established firms would make blunders and then start again with new businesses when the government discovered that they were not paying taxes. Between $8 and $10 million a week were earned by Michael and his team selling fuel at competitive pricing. The man purchased a private plane and a house in New York and Florida for himself. Michael is this person. What do the top bosses have? The Mafia may earn over $60 billion a year, according to federal officials. Can you think of such an absurd figure? This was the whole nation's budget at the time. Even though the FBI failed, they possessed a powerful tool against the Mafia, the RICO legislation. A professor by the name of Robert Blakey drafted this legislation in 1970 with the intention of destroying the Mafia, its leaders, and all those who were engaged. Despite having this statute for years, the FBI was unsure of how to apply it. This legislation, therefore, is what? Here is what the RICO statute is. We said that prior to this regulation, the police would only detain the troops carrying out the crimes. They would not be able to connect them to the commanders who issued the instructions. But with the passage of this law, they were able to arrest everyone engaged in the crime and convict someone of instructing someone else to commit a crime. All that is needed of them is to associate the crimes with the people. For instance, they must associate a drug trafficking crime with the troops, the bosses, and every member of the family that is participating in the crime. Following an explanation of this statute, the FBI was able to get to work and started building the RICO case against the 5 Mafia factions in 1980. Within the FBI, they established 5 teams, each of which was entrusted with keeping tabs on a Mafia family and obtaining information about it in order to convict it of a major offense. We will talk separately about each family. Separately, but in this case they encountered one issue. No Mafia member was willing to testify against their family. The higher-ups did not conduct crimes, as I said, and the jailed troops lacked critical information. How would the FBI obtain information on them, then? In order to gather proof of illegal activity from the boss's talks, they determined that the best course of action was to put listening devices in locations that one of them frequently visits, such as their home or vehicle. Brass, an FBI supervisor, was given the Gambino family case and led the investigation alongside 300 agents and 21 detectives. "300 agents, a captain, and thousands of helpers. Can you comprehend this enormous quantity?" Paul Castellano, the boss, was their primary target, and they were all tasked with learning more about a single family. Knowing that Paul resided in a large home on Staten Island, New York, the FBI set out to install a microphone inside the home and listen in on him. But the first issue they encountered was the difficulty of invading someone's privacy or listening in on them without a court order. A federal judge had to be presented with sufficient material that they had gathered, either through informants or surveillance. This court would carefully consider the facts and deny the request if he found that it was insufficient or that the eavesdropping had violated the target's privacy without cause. Since the wiretap unjustly violates the target's privacy, the request is turned down. Since they lacked solid evidence or proof against him, they focused on another place, the building known as Burn Hunt and Fish. For the Gambino family, this structure served as a private meeting spot where they discussed their misdeeds in clandestine sessions. High-ranking family members convened there out of sight, and a captain by the name of John Gotti was in command. Later in the novel, we'll come back to this name, so keep it in mind. Following their discovery of this building, the FBI started keeping a careful eye on it. They also received information from earlier sources that John Gotti's bodyguard was a powerful individual with a violent reputation who would stop at nothing to keep Gotti safe. He was named Angelo Ruggiero, and he was charged with several crimes by the FBI. In order to implant a listening device on him, they were able to obtain permission to call him the Black Bag Man. The eavesdropping operation on the 5 families would be greatly aided by this individual, John Cantamessa. He has expertise breaking into security doors and setting up covert microphones. As soon as Joe took over the investigation, he began conducting remote surveillance of Angelo's home in an effort to learn as much as he could. He saw that there was never a quiet moment in the home, so it was hard to sneak in. So he thought about other possibilities. At the time, he was aware that the landline phone was disconnecting and that there was a wiring issue in that property. To fix the problem, Ruggiero complained to the phone provider. Agent Joe knew at this point that this was the time he had been anticipating. He informed the business not to send a technician after getting in touch with them. In order to install the listening device, he chose to pose as a representative of the phone company. He did, in fact, dress in the phone company outfit, packed a suitcase with all the equipment he would need, and went to the residence. He rapped on the door and stepped inside. Another agent outside took the video you saw. He put the listening device inside and unplugged the landline phone as Angelo hurried away from Joe. He put a listening device inside and put it back in. He had promised the firm that he would resolve the issue once he was inside the house, giving the impression that he had finished his work. In fact, Ruggiero left the house after resolving the issue, and the agent started listening in on him to record any sensitive or significant information regarding his actions. They began to hear damning discussions, such as him giving orders to his aides to kill individuals and a phone chat he had with a drug dealer. Ruggiero was found to be a heroin dealer who had engaged in transactions totaling millions of dollars. Although they found no proof connecting his illegal operations to the family leader, Paul Castellano, this information was sufficient to condemn him in court. For 6 whole months, they kept an eye on him, listening in on his phone conversations, and discovered that he often went to Paul's residence and spoke with several family members. Angelo would go home after their sessions. This demonstrated that Paul was having meetings with relatives at his home to talk about criminal issues. As we previously said, the FBI needed this proof in order to secure a warrant to listen in on Paul Castellano's home. But even with the warrant, the operation was extremely challenging and intricate. You should never approach a boss from a mafia family. How would they get a listening device inside his home? The White House was the moniker given to this residence. They listened to his calls and kept an eye on him for 6 whole months. They discovered that he often visited Paul's home and met with several family members there. He went back to his own home after their sessions. This demonstrated that Paul was having meetings with relatives at his home to talk about criminal issues. As we previously said, the FBI needed this proof in order to secure a warrant to tap Paul Castellano's home. But even with the warrant, the operation was extremely challenging and intricate. An untouchable individual is a mafia family head. How would they get a listening device inside his home? The White House was the name given to this. Therefore, anyone who were aware of this strategy from the start would have laughed out loud. But nothing is impossible. Following a discussion among themselves, the undercover operatives concluded that since Paul's home was never completely unoccupied, it was also hard to enter there covertly. However, there was a catch. The property had the newest phones and a contemporary TV in the kitchen, among other pieces of technology. He would congregate in the kitchen with his relatives. It was simple to tap into the cable systems, according to undercover agent Joe's investigation into how the cable signal was connected to the television. He could cause issues and noise in the area by utilizing the television to cause disruptions, and that's precisely what took place. You'll laugh out loud if you hear my idea from the start, yet nothing is impossible. Following a discussion among themselves, the undercover operatives concluded that since Paul's home was constantly crowded, it was also hard to enter there covertly. But there was a catch. The house was equipped with all the latest technology, including the newest phones and a television that was strategically positioned in the kitchen, where he and his family congregated. Joe, the undercover agent, looked into how the cable systems linked to the TV and discovered that it was simple to tamper with them. He may provoke a disruption that would cause the television to malfunction and generate chaos in the room, and that's precisely what took place. One of Paul's guards phoned a technician to fix the issue when the ruckus got out of hand. Who else but Joe, the troubleshooter, of course? Tommy Bellotti, Paul's first helper, opened the door when he arrived and rang the ring. There was a great deal of anxiety when Joe walked into the house. The house was full of hitmen, and he had entered the home of a Mafia family boss, a guy they had hoped to approach. There would be serious consequences for him if they detected him. Joe went inside and switched on the TV and dialed his helper, who was standing outside. He began hammering on the television, creating interference, while feigning that this individual was his helper at work. One of the guards at Paul Lavin's house had to fix the problem because of the excessive noise, and it was Joe, the problem solver, of course. Tommy Pilotti, who was the first assistant, answered the door for him once he arrived and rang the bell. There was a great deal of anxiety when Joe walked into the house. The house was full of hitmen, and he had entered the home of a Mafia family head, a guy they had hoped to approach. They wouldn't hesitate to take him out if they had any suspicions. Joe walked in, switched on the television, and summoned his helper, who was standing outside. While his helper tampered with the cable systems, he lied that this individual was his assistant at work and began tapping on the TV, pretending that the issue wasn't being resolved with the cable systems. Naturally, this whole situation was prearranged in order to disassemble the TV and insert the tracking device inside, and that's precisely what took place. Without anybody noticing, he grabbed the chance, disassembled the TV, and inserted the tracking device inside. The TV functioned flawlessly once he summoned his aide to end the sabotage operation. The loved one prepared himself, packed his belongings, and departed from the house. After the device implantation operation was successful, the FBI began listening in on every discussion taking place in the kitchen. To put it mildly, what they heard was stunning. Castellano discussed a wide range of topics, speaking with discussing labor unions or trade unions with Joe Arman, a member of his family. What exactly are labor unions, you ask? Organizations known as labor unions represent employees across a range of industries with the goal of defending their rights and interests. They strive to ensure fair salaries and better working conditions at the same time. The FBI recognized that the majority of New York's labor organizations, such as the Teamsters, building trades, hotel workers and others, were under the influence of organized crime. In a number of ways, they took advantage of these unions to profit. Man, the Mafia had a lot of power. Mafia had a lot of They were in charge of every union, and they even gave the order for truck drivers to go on strike from 1957 until 1971. Financial extortion was the primary cause of this activity. Large corporations were compelled to give them bribes, and those who refused to pay suffered significant losses. Second, the Mafia sought to show off their might and influence over the transportation industry, among other sectors. Conflicts with the government were the third factor. The strikes were a reaction to the government's efforts to lessen the Mafia's power. They carried out strikes for a number of additional reasons. What, particularly, was the effect of the truck drivers' strike then? First, because these trucks were in charge of moving commodities between states, the supply stoppage generated losses in the billions of dollars in a short period of time, which partially shut down the economy. Food, gasoline and other necessities were thus halted during any strike. Since these trucks were in charge of moving commodities between states, the supply stoppage caused losses of billions of dollars in a short period of time and partially shut down the economy. Food, gasoline and other necessities were thus halted during any strike. Second, millions of people whose lives depended on the goods and services that the trucks carried were impacted socially by the strikes. The Mafia also controlled pension funds, which comprised hundreds of millions of dollars in banks that they could move any time they pleased. How could that have occurred? As they had authority over the insurance firms and banking. They would have undoubtedly ruled the nation if they had dominated each of these unions. You guys have to be taking this seriously. They control the nation and may manipulate the economy any way they see fit. Investigators that worked on the cases of these 5 families stated this. So it's not just my perspective. Since the 5 Mafia families, particularly the Gambino family, controlled the New York fish market, restaurants, product transportation and clothing manufacturing, particularly in the garment district, one of the most significant economic hubs for the city's apparel manufacturing, they actually became more involved in the mainstream than in criminal activity. Remember how we discussed the tale of Peter Cassis, the thief who used to steal clothing from the city. Furthermore, some of the 5 families controlled hospitals, ports, ships and many farms. Some of them even held positions in the judiciary. Thus, the FBI obtained all of this information when they wiretapped Paul Castellano in order to face him in court and smash this group. The FBI started searching for a method to wiretap the Colombo family in 1982. Like the other families, this family engaged in all the customary practices, including usury, illicit business dealings, truck hijacking between states, abduction, and several killings. Naturally, murder charges were sufficient to secure a federal judge's warrant to place a listening device in this home. After the family members were arrested, the FBI required proof to show the court, even though they were aware of all the crimes they were committed. Thus, they initially began keeping an eye on Carmen Persico, the family's underboss. They saw that he would visit Brooklyn's Casa Sorrento restaurant every Friday. They then discovered that the Colombo family met and discussed their covert transactions in this Mafia-owned eatery. This restaurant was open to the public even though it was unofficially owned by the Mafia. In order to get information and determine if it would be feasible to enter covertly and install a listening device, the FBI dispatched an agent to the eatery. He and his girlfriend proceeded to the restaurant dressed in civilian clothing. After he took a seat, he made an effort to learn as much as he could about the location and locate the Mafia members' seats. He observed Gennaro and his associates playing cards in a room, so he committed the layout to memory and determined the best location for the covert installation of the listening devices. In order to unlock the door lock and gain entry without raising suspicions, the FBI then dispatched a guy wearing a black bag to place the listening device late at night, followed by locksmiths. The restaurant had a big dog named Nina that roamed the grounds at night, which presented a challenge. They had to enter through the front entrance because the eatery lacked a rear door. Nina sprang at the first locksmith that came in and grabbed his shoe. However, since they had a sedative syringe, they had prepared for this. But they didn't know if the dog would survive the sedative or not. There was no rear door for them to enter, and a large dog named Nina was inside, keeping watch over the eatery at night. The front door was the only way in. Nina flung herself at him and seized his shoe as the first agent unlocked the door and went inside. They had a tranquilizer, so they were ready for anything, but they weren't sure if she would survive or not. The second agent came in right quickly with a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher to prevent any threat, and he sprayed her till she left them and sat far away. After that, they went into the restaurant to set up a listening device in the dining area where Gennaro and Angela were seated. The next day, they begin eavesdropping to the gang members' chats in the room where Gennaro Langella is sitting. However, the restaurant is quite noisy, with several people conversing at once, some of them loudly. In the middle of the screaming, clattering plates and laughter, it was extremely challenging to separate the noises and identify the crucial and essential words. This presented a problem for the eavesdropping agents. It didn't take long, though, since a few days later, while Gennaro was talking to two Mafia members in the room, one of them picked up on the wire hanging from the ceiling and recognized it as an additional wire. They recognized it as a listening device as soon as he saw it. They cut the FBI's wiretap device so they could listen in on them. The mobsters now understood that their scheme had not worked. As you can see, the Mafia was well versed in spotting these issues, since they frequently discovered wiretapping equipment that the FBI had hidden in their vehicles, residences or public gathering spots. An FBI informant would occasionally even conceal a wiretap device beneath their clothes. The FBI sought a new method to wiretap the Colombo family because their original strategy had failed. We discussed how the Colombo and Gambino families were wiretapped by the FBI. They began spying on the Lucchese family in 1991, primarily targeting Tony C., the boss, but this man was exceedingly careful. Despite being detained and questioned by the FBI over 20 times, he somehow avoided being charged. They discovered a new individual named Sal Finello after keeping an eye on him for a number of years. He was close to his employer, Tony Corral, even though he was a soldier in the family. First, the FBI discovered that Avino was in charge of the Lucchese family's waste business. This waste industry, what is it? It was one of the regions in New York that the Mafia, particularly the Lucchese family, dominated. Waste has to be gathered, disposed of and recycled. They owned a number of businesses that were leaders in this industry. He was a very careful individual. Despite being detained and questioned by the FBI over 20 times, he somehow avoided being charged. They discovered a new individual named Sal Finello after several years of observation. He was close to Tony Corral, the boss, even though he was a soldier in the family. The first thing the agents discovered about Avino was that he was in charge of the Lucchese family's waste management company. What is this company? The Lucchese family in particular controlled the waste management industry in New York. Waste has to be gathered, disposed of and recycled. They owned a number of businesses that were leaders in this industry. Under the guise of protection costs, this industry was regulated by charging rival businesses monthly fees. Businesses were damaged or intimidated by those who refused to participate. They also wanted to launder money from other illicit activities, such as unlawful gambling and drug use, through this commerce. In the event that the government attempted to play hardball with them, they most crucially exploited this field as leverage. For instance, if the sanitation workers were on strike, rubbish collection would cease, causing catastrophes throughout the city. The second thing the agents found was that Sal Finello usually drove Tony Corral, the boss, in his black Jaguar. Boss Tony was always in it, and this man became his confidant and driver. The agents were certain that this individual was speaking directly with Boss Tony about delicate subjects. They considered installing a listening device in Sal's vehicle, but getting approval was an extremely challenging task. How would they demonstrate to the judge that the two individuals in the automobile would talk about a particular offence? In this case, the court had to be persuaded that they could install a listening device in Sal's Jaguar. They sought the help of a Lucchese family informant. Under the pretense of being soldiers, the FBI had agents operating inside these 5 families, but actually they work as FBI informants. Naturally, these troops sell the information they can get because, as we already stated, they do not possess critical information. In a covert meeting at a city hotel, the agent working on the Lucchese family case questioned the informant if Vinny and boss Tony Corral had discussed the family's crimes inside the Jaguar. In response, the informant acknowledged that they do talk about really delicate subjects while they are together in the Jaguar and offered some supporting documentation. In this case, the agent's testimony was enough to get the judge to issue a warrant for the device's installation inside the vehicle. The goal was to conceal a gadget within the vehicle. They had to first decide where to conceal it, and because the gadget needed to be connected to the car's battery, the position needed to be carefully considered. The specialists began examining, removing, and relocating equipment when they delivered an automobile that was exactly like Finello's. After that, they put it back together, tested it and drove it to see if there would be any problems or interference, or if it would operate flawlessly. They concluded that the front of the vehicle, near the steering wheel, was the ideal spot. Once the position was determined, they began estimating how long it would take to unlock the automobile door and place the device inside. Until they had mastered the procedure, they continued to repeat it. The group was prepared and awaiting the ideal moment to carry out the operation. After a while, Jaguar gave them a key to Avenue's vehicle. They assisted them in copying his car's key after presenting the case to them. Avenue got home late on a chilly and wet night, and as there was no parking close by, he parked the car a few ways from his house. He was watched by the clients till he went inside. The professionals got to work right away. Using the key they received from Jaguar, they unlocked the automobile door, put plastic bags inside to keep the vehicle dry, hurriedly put the device in place, and cleaned their fingerprints. After leaving their fingerprints, they locked it and ran away. Here is the end of the first part of our amazing story, full of fictional events. Wait until I download the second part of the story, and I promise that I will not be late. And write in the comments, did you like the story?